This is Kira and her daughter, Zami, who was forcibly removed from her care just 2 hours after being born. Kira is a 38-year-old Inuit woman who came to Denmark when she was 19 to study to be a masseuse. In connection with the job, where she was looking after a woman's 2 children, she ended up landing on the radar of what is equivalent to social services in Denmark. And in time, her 9-year-old, Zoe, who is now 20 years old, was forcibly removed and put into a foster home, and then later a residential institution. And her son, who was 8 months old at the time, was also forcibly removed and put into care of his Bosnian grandmother and grandfather. And now, Kira has lost her 3rd child to the state, just hours after being born. And the reason for the removal? The cover letter of her case file states the following. Kira's Greenlandic heritage influences her communication style, where even subtle facial cues hold meaning. However, as the child will be raised in Denmark. So the state's claiming this child? It is anticipated that Kira may struggle to prepare the child for the social norms and expectations prevalent in Danish culture. I know, there is a lot to unpack here, especially for detailed assessment for an unborn child. And that's what actually makes this particular case unique. So you're probably wondering, how do we get here? Glad you asked. Parent competency tests, or FKUs. Now, these tests are used in conjunction with examinations from caseworkers and psychologists, effectively when they're doing an investigation on a child welfare case across the entire country. Denmark, to be specific. There's a problem here. Actually, a lot. The first issue is actually these FKU tests. Now, there's actually 9 of them in total. And we're going to run through some of them. And a lot of these, though, really have no basis for determining whether somebody is competent to be a parent. And we're actually going to connect these to the 1700s in a bit. Next, these tests are flawed because they're basically built for Danes. And there is no adaptations or considerations for Inuit and their own cultural norms. So by nature, these tests are actually very discriminatory towards Inuit. Next, these tests and the examination, all their communication, everything is conducted in Danish. What does that mean? Even though Inuit may know varying levels of Danish due to the impact of colonization, for most, if they speak it, it is a second language. If one doesn't have a strong enough command on the language, talking like fluency or native tongue, because you're testing. People taking these tests are set up to fail. They are guaranteed access to an interpreter, and the state will cover those costs. However, from the reports that I've read, it seems not enough interpreters are actually being called forth. It seems like the caseworkers actually aren't even able to assess whether an interpreter is even needed. Another aspect that's important to consider here is how cultures communicate. Western culture, Danish culture is very verbal. Inuit culture, they also communicate via nonverbal methods. So posture, behavior, facial expressions. Belungwak is an Inuk mother who had all 3 of her children forcibly removed, and she sees them about 1 to 2 times per week. She mentioned in an interview that Inuit communicate with their eyes, and something such as a wrinkle of the nose means I don't know. And I can confirm, as somebody who spent a lot of time the last 3 years in the country doing this work, and also just making a Gingotuk friends, there is a lot of nonverbal communication happening that I can actually see, and I'm slowly learning, because I'm trying to also learn the verbal language too. If you're not fluent in this language and you are nervous and scared of losing your child, the natural physical reaction would be to lean into all modes of communication, which the person on the other end of that interaction, they're not able to read that. The Danish Association of Psychologists has stated that not all psychologists have the necessary competencies and the right knowledge of cross-cultural psychology. I think I'm going to call that a red flag, right? Yeah. Apparently this has been mandated to change, and the psychologists, get certified in cross-cultural psychology. But as we know, Denmark is never in a hurry to do anything that's right. But I want to get back to these tests because I want to show how all of these challenges are seeded throughout all of them, or the ones that we're going to talk about. Like I said, we got 9 right here, okay? There seems to be like 3 or 4 that are the most common, so those are the ones that we're going to pull out. And I'm going to do this one first. The IQ test. Wananook mother, Opalu Blato, I hope I said her name right. Her twins were forcibly removed and sent to a Danish family. When she took the test, she got a 72, which is considered slightly intellectually disabled. And her comment about this test was this: I think it was difficult when you don't understand that much Danish. That actually becomes one of the flaws here. One of the reports I read noted that when they reviewed several cases of Inuit families that had their children forcibly removed, many of them actually had low IQ scores. So now, since the 1970s, there have been several foreign studies that have actually shown that there is cultural bias in these standardized intellectual tests, like this exact one. In 1986, they actually ran a test in so-called Canada. Apologies if this leaf is a little defunct. They ran this test on Inuit children there. 77% of them received a score of 70 or below on the verbal part. This too, when they were classified, is intellectually disabled. And they actually ran the same issue when they conducted this test with Aboriginal adults in Australia. This test was part of Kira's evaluation, and she's had several over the years: 2014, 2016, 2019, and this year, 2024. Next, we have the Rochelle test, ink blot test. You know what ink blot is, right? Yeah. Back to my earlier point of questioning how any of these tests are supposed to provide any level of clarity about how somebody's going to be a parent. We're using an ink blot. One of the biggest issues that surfaces with this test is these ink blots. They're riddled with misunderstandings because of cultural differences. And like the IQ test, there's absolutely no adaptation here for Inuit culture. So to a Westerner, this might appear to be 2 gnomes, but to Inuit, this isn't common to see or even draw that correlation in their country. To a Westerner, this might appear to be a butterfly, but to Balunwa, she saw a tulipik. Hope I said that right, which is the soul of an ancestor. So our last one that we're going to discuss is this one, RME. This is where you're presented with a series of images where all you see is the person's eyes, and you have to assess the emotions of that person. But back to the point earlier, when we talk about cultural differences and the ways in which different groups communicate, Inuit communicate with their eyes and with other nonverbal ways, meaning their mimicry is different. I had to guess how they felt, and it was very difficult because they are different from Greenlandic mimicry. I can't see their feelings. And neither can I, apparently, because I took the test. I'm already feeling stressed on the first question. It's showing me a face, and it's like, what emotion is it? You're like, maybe amused? It's like amused or insisting. I don't know. Aghast? Aghast? What does aghast mean? See, these are so close to each other. I'm going to go indifferent because I'm really indifferent about this one. So I'm doing my last face now. This project is still stupid. Okay, it's asking if you are a native speaker of English. Did you recognize all the words used? No, I did not recognize all the words used. I got 22 out of 36. The average score is 36. This one was developed in the UK, and the images you saw were taken from British magazines in the 1990s. Unsurprisingly, the test doesn't work perfectly for people who are not native speakers of English, or for people who come from cultures that are different from Britons. Literally, this is the point. This is literally the point. So these tests actually come from the US and Canada, and they are then adapted to wherever they're being used. So in this case, they're being adapted to a Danish market. I am part British, for those that don't know. If I literally failed that test, what do you think is happening to Inuit parents when they're taking this test? Even though experts like Rune Nielsen, who is a senior researcher at Denmark's largest hospital, and institutions like Institute for Human Rights have spoken outwardly about these tests aren't working, they are still being used to forcibly remove children at a much higher rate than Danish children. 7% of children who are born in Nunavut that live in Denmark are forcibly removed from their families. 5% if at least one parent is from the country. This is all compared to 1% of Danish children. So where are they actually going? In a report I read in 2022, most are going to foster families, and a few are going to residential institutions like Zoe did in the end. We're going to talk about this again in a bit, but Danish are obligated to protect the cultural identity of Inuit in their country, per the ILO Convention number 169, which is the Indigenous and Tribal Peoples Organization. What this means, if they need to remove children and place them, they need to make every effort to place them with another Inuit family so that they can preserve their culture and language. Is it happening? I couldn't find any data. But at least for all the cases that were mentioned that I looked at, they all of them, went to Danish families. And this is actually something that Kira's oldest daughter, Zoe, brought up in an interview. I lost my language and my culture. I love the Greenlandic culture. Christmas, Easter, their first sunny days, family time, and old stories from Greenland, national costume, and yes, Greenlandic food. I lost my identity. I was raised to be a Dane. And it does not suit my heart well. So the larger issue that we're stumbling upon here, Denmark is perpetrating the same pattern of violence, the same pattern of assimilation, the same pattern of culture erasure, the same pattern of stealing children as they did between the 1950s and 70s when they took about 22 children, I believe, sent them to Denmark to become Danish, to become white. Nothing has changed since the 1950s, when Nunavut was annexed into the Kingdom of Denmark, when all Inuit became Danish nationals. Becoming a national meant it was guaranteeing you rights. It was guaranteeing you equality. It was guaranteeing that you would have the same privileges as a Dane. But that's not the case, and it has never been. In fact, ratifying ILO Convention number 169 in 1996 and voting in favor of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People in 2007, decades after taking their identity and assimilating them, meant their indigeneity would finally be recognized, their rights protected. Support would be provided by the state to navigate any barriers, such as the interpreters that I mentioned earlier, and they live free of discrimination. But Denmark has never protected their rights, nor treated them as equals. I've talked about a lot on my channel, and also in even my last episode, the differences that Denmark creates between these two groups. If you're a Danish national born outside the country, so more than likely you are ethnically Danish, you earn double the income than if you're Inuit, or you're a Danish national born inside the country, which probably means that you're Inuit. In Denmark, Inuit are twice as likely to be homeless, to experience poverty, to not have enough money to buy food, compared to any other socially disadvantaged group in that entire country. Denmark's supposed to have this stellar social system. Where is it? Denmark continues to treat Inuit as inferior. And for a country that's really good, like really good at separation, really good at making differences, when you actually are supposed to here, by way of adapting these tests to include and account for Inuit culture, they don't. But of course they don't, and they won't, because they benefit more from the continued suppression of Inuit. Not supporting Inuit in Denmark because they're probably deemed as like unsavable. More money for Denmark, because less resources for them. Paying Danes in Nunavut twice as much as Inuit guarantees you a Danish workforce in that country. Sitting on top. Keeping eyes on everything. There's a reason why any top dog there in almost any sector, Danish. It's about control. And they benefit from that control. Taking children, assimilating them, making them productive members of society, more money for Denmark, right? But they've gotten away as a benevolent colonizer for decades now. or hundreds of years really, why don't I keep it going, right? Because they know when they start unraveling this and they have to make these adjustments for one thing, whatever that first thing is, and if it is this case, then they gotta start doing it for everything else. Again, it will cost them more to do what they're supposed to do, which is to protect Inuit culture and identity per the ILO convention, than just to continue suppressing Inuit. Now, I want to go back to these tests because there's been something like niggling at me that I haven't been able to piece together. And I think we got to go back in time to get some answers. We got to go back to the 1700s when controversial Norwegian priest Hans, whatever his last name is. So he arrived in the country in 1721 and lived there for about 15 years and started the process of colonization. Now, I actually read one of his books because he wrote a few. Description of Greenland. Now, I'm actually working on a story that I will launch after the season on YouTube where I will discuss that book much more in depth because I got a lot of problems with it. But it is my belief that this is the beginning and also the foundation of racist rhetoric that we hear in the country today about Inuit. Page 122. The Greenlanders are commonly of a phlegmatic temper, which is the cause of a cold nature and stupidity. They seldom fly into a passion or are much affected or taken with anything but of an insensible, indolent mind. Page 148. The education of their children is what they seem little concerned about, for they never make use of whipping or hard words to correct them when they do anything amiss, but leave them to their own discretion. Now, what he is doing here is actually establishing their behavior as bad, inferior to Western norms. But it's problematic because he's stating conjectures as fact. He's stating that they are lazy, that they are dumb, completely dismissing what we discussed earlier about there being different communication styles, that they communicate in other ways, which is nonverbal ways. He's also establishing this narrative that Inuit parents don't care about their kids. They're therefore not good parents. Their entire disposition, from his perspective, is negative, is bad, and it needs to be saved. And how convenient he happened to be there. The last excerpt I want to read is from a chapter titled The Greenlanders' Persons, Complexion, and Temperament. Yeah, it's a real title. Their bodies are of a vigorous constitution. There are seldom found any sick or lame, and but few distempers are known among them. Besides, weakness of the eyesight. It's really not lost on me that between the examinations and these tests, that they are just coincidentally illuminating some of the things that Hans has brought up in his book, the rhetoric that he said, and the randomness of some of these tests being so visual-based when he's saying in his book they have bad eyesight. I am not saying that Inuit have bad eyesight. Hans said it. When we talk about tactics to enforce the systematic racism happening in that country, it's almost like were they chosen so Inuit intentionally would fail? Now, you're probably thinking, that's a stretch, Kamari. Maybe. I'm going to give you another example from my side of the world. Medical apartheid. Now, this was the practice of using slave bodies to test, to build, and refine modern medicine. The father of genealogy, J. Marion Sims, he enslaved about 12 black women in his house, and he would conduct painful experimental surgeries on them without anesthesia. Why? Because there was this belief that was fabricated during slavery that we do not feel pain. I'm going to fast forward to 2017. Y'all know Serena Williams, right? Probably. She almost died during childbirth. You know why? Doctors weren't listening to her when she was saying something was wrong with her baby. Influencer Jessica Petway. She passed away a few months ago because she was misdiagnosed by a doctor. Doctor wasn't listening to her. There's an article from the LA Times in 2020 where it states the following. Studies have confirmed that many doctors often don't hear Black women or see their pain. I can't tell you how many times personally that I have opened up Instagram to another Black woman specifically that has died because of medical apartheid. Racist beliefs, racist rhetoric, and racist practices from hundreds of years ago still exist today in 2024. This is not an opinion, this is a fact. If medically trained doctors coming from some of the best institutions from America can't see Black pain, you don't think that all the racist rhetoric from Hans that has been seeped throughout the entire society for hundreds of years, that doesn't have any influence at all? They are using tests, random, illogical tests like the ink blot that is visual based. And Hans is saying in his book that Inuit have bad eyesight. Y'all can call it a coincidence? I don't buy it. I have seen enough to know how deeply rooted the insidious beliefs and the insidious language that perpetrates that entire society. And I know that that's affecting everybody, including all those at the top making critical decisions about what? About children, about tests, about examinations. And I bet you that if there are some beliefs running around in that society that providing a certain test is going to protect the benefits of Denmark, they're going to do it. So back to Kier, and where are they today? She has her own home. She has a permanent job. She sees Joey regularly, and she's in touch with her son often too. She is stable and she is managing herself. And yet she only gets to see her newborn daughter once now every 2 weeks for 1 hour. And all because she can't read Danish facial cues due to useless, flawed, and unadapted discriminatory tests. And on top of that, she has to pay what is equivalent to $280 to the foster family for taking care of her. She does have a lawyer, and she has 2 NGO charities that are fighting her case to get it turned around. There have been demonstrations in Copenhagen and Nuuk to really put pressure on the government to address this. There have been some meetings, I believe, too, between the Department of Children and Young People in Nunavut and the Danish Minister of Social Affairs. Communication coming initially out of the meeting, which was coming from Nunavut's side, was much stronger, saying that they were going to stop using these tests. But a few days later, Danish minister came back with watered-down language, saying that they would urge the local municipalities to stop using the tests. Even if the final mandate is to get rid of the tests or adapt them, what will it be replaced by? And when will that be available? Again, based on Denmark's track record for a lot of other things, I don't think they're going to be in any hurry to do that. And that point can even be proven by how this story is being circulated in the country right now. I found out about it because my friends were posting about it. There is no Danish media outlet that has covered this to date. The Guardian is the only one that's really been covering it from like an international perspective. Denmark is silent, as they always are. In conclusion, one can hope that the continued pressure from the community, and you can do your part too by sharing this video or sharing any other pieces around this. I will include links in my story, also my highlights, depending on when you're watching this, to make Denmark accountable. Make them accountable to Kira and all the Inuit families that they have broken, to stop them from using these tests. And every effort should be made to bring these kids home. Inuit parents deserve to be parents too.